near you.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome. Good evening, Gary. Hello everybody. Nice to see you there. Hello, blue-eyed Northern Crystal. Nice to have you there. Welcome, Catherine. Nice to see you. I'm glad you made this edition. Rebecca, I hope you got the tow truck on standby. Hopefully we don't need it. So, hello there. Liana, tuning in tonight. Well, welcome. So, what are you doing there, Justin? How are you doing?
Hey, all right. I'm a little bush beat today. Decided to take an impromptu road trip, and I am currently in an undisclosed location in the Smoky Mountains. So,
oui.
Yeah.
That means yes in French. So interesting. So welcome everybody. A round of applause. Nice to have everybody tonight. So yes, I did tip my toes in the fountain of youth. Everybody, I had to. It was about that time. So nice to see everybody. So hello, Bigfoot Reports and Data. Nice to have you to tune in. Thank you. So what are we going to do tonight, kind sir?
Well, tonight I don't have a lot of information to discuss, but what I do have to discuss, I think, is a really important piece when we're studying cryptozoology and just unknown animals as a whole. And so this is going to be kind of an intro idea to the next couple of shows. So I wanted to go over this idea so we had a clear understanding. And what we're going to talk about is what is known in science as Lazarus animals. Lazarus animals, yes. So anybody in the audience that wants to add to the discussion, let's talk about it. I'm going to really encourage questions today because, like I said, this isn't necessarily a deep topic. There's not a huge amount to discuss on it, but it's an important one to understand as we go forward with our discussions. And so Lazarus animals, you know what a Lazarus animal is, Grizzly? It's kind of a weird term.
Yeah, whether they are extinct or not. What are we seeing?
Right. Essentially, it's the idea of an animal that was thought to be extinct, but has been rediscovered as alive. And a lot of Lazarus animals are also what are called zombie animals. Or they're also a zombie animal is when it's already extinct again, right? And so let's say they found it in a certain layer and they dated the fossils to a certain age and they declare that that's the age they died out. But then they'll find them in another younger layer that they're like, oh, well, they shouldn't be here because they've already died out. So that's another kind of form of it. And another one that we see and hear a lot of is the term living fossils. A living fossil. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. And that has, in my personal view, it has a lot of impact and importance when we start talking about how animals, how they work and how things happen and timelines and all that stuff. I'm not a big proponent of the evolutionary model. And I think these types of animals are one of the issues that have a problem with that. And so I think things need to be adjusted sometimes a little bit. That's just a personal belief. And so when we start talking about Lazarus animals, there's a really famous one that comes to mind. And it's also very iconic in the world of cryptozoology. And Bigfoot Reports and Data pulls it out. They said like the coelacanth or whatever that fish they found. Exactly. The coelacanth is kind of like an iconic picture of what a Lazarus animal is. So the coelacanth was originally found in the fossil record, declared to have gone extinct over 65 million years ago. So at the time of the dinosaurs, this critter was considered completely extinct until the 1930s when it was actually discovered in a fish market. I want to say in Madagascar in the 1930s. There was a biologist person just kind of walking through and saw this fish, and they were like, well, that's a weird looking fish. Come to find out, the fishermen had been catching him for generations. Not very often. It was considered a deep fish and a rare fish, but they were very familiar with it. And so the scientists studied it, and it was the coelacanth, a four-limbed fish that was supposedly one of the evolutionary ancestors to some land animals. And they actually found a couple of different populations off of Africa, basically. And so the problem with this is they have to throw this whole thing out of the water that these fish went extinct 65 million years ago, right? Because obviously it did not. So how does that happen? And then on top of it, it's also considered a living fossil. And what a living fossil means is that it is relatively unchanged from the fossil record, which means even though there's a gap of supposedly 65 million years, in evolutionary terms, nothing changed in that time frame on that animal.
That's wild.
Right? And so, yeah, it's a very odd occurrence. And then, they'll have their explanations, and everybody, oh, well, they didn't change. There was no this, no that, no pressures to cause different things. And that's all fine and good. But I think it presents a real problem for it. But why does this matter to us in cryptozoology? Well, a coelacanth would be a classic picture of an animal known locally that science doesn't accept as still existing, which is a very common, thing when it comes to cryptozoology. We have local people that say something is there, they believe something is there, but science won't take them seriously, right? And I was doing a little bit of extra research on this today, and I knew there was a few species of Lazarus animals. But when I started looking it up, I found many, many more that I didn't know about. And I just found it really interesting. And we're going to go over some of that tonight, and we can have a discussion about what they are and different things like that. I'm seeing some comments coming through that we can take a look at. So what I did is I just did a quick Google search on it. I went to Wikipedia, and I know Wikipedia is not like an official source, but it does kind of give you a good overview of what's going on. And just the whole list of different things that I found that were considered Lazarus animals. A really interesting one that I found, and this is one of the older ones, was there was a class of mollusks believed to have gone extinct about 380 million years ago. All right, so we're talking like a shellfish kind of critter, a mollusk, like a clam kind of a thing. 380 million years ago, it went extinct in the fossil record, which means past that time frame, they didn't find it anymore until they found it living off of Costa Rica in 1952, which to me just absolutely kind of blows my mind. Think about that for a second. Here we have what is supposed to be one of the lower forms of life, one of the initial sea creatures, mollusks. They're considered an ancient type creature. And yet here we are 350 million years later, and they're still around, right? Not to mention the idea of sea critters and mollusks especially, that there's not a whole lot of fossils in those creatures. So they already have a very, very small sampling anyway, but to find these ones that are so old in the fossil record and to still be around in the deep sea. I mean, I don't understand how people can come across that. Scientists can look at that, but then totally dismiss the ideas of other animals in the deep sea doing that, right? So we talk about like a megalodon. They say that megalodons went extinct. They're not around. It's not possible. They just laugh at people that have these sightings or make reports. And yet here we have proof of an animal that would have died out millions and millions and millions of years before it, and we're still finding them alive. So thought that was a really important one for our discussion tonight. There's a lot of insects that are on this list. There was a fly that was discovered as a fossil in amber that was said 100 million years old in 1999, but then they found it living in Namibia in 2010. We have pine trees. There was a pine tree that was only known from fossils 2 to 90 million years ago, but it was discovered in 1994. And they call it rediscovered, as if we already had it discovered, other than the fossil record. There's a specific type of redwood that was described as a fossil in 1941, but then discovered alive in 1944. There was a bat. I thought this was interesting. There was a bat known from a single fossil species described in 2003 in Germany. And it was dated 11 to 16 million years ago. But then they discovered that it was actually previously classified and discovered, and they classified it something else. But after re-looking at everything, they decided, nope, we made a mistake, that it's actually from this fossil, and it hasn't changed at all. It was some of the small features that wouldn't be fossilized that kind of distinct it all, made it distinct from the other ones. And so here we have incorrect classification of a creature and reclassification, and it became a Lazarus animal. And this is what I talk about. Like, if you ever see me out on Facebook, you'll know that this is a hill that I fight on a lot, is this idea that science is right. It's incorruptible. And if science says so, then that just has to be. And a lot of people will argue that, and I'll tell them that's not the case at all. Science is always changing. What was true 100 years ago in science is not true today.
That's true.
I mean that's just a fact. Everybody knows this, right? But what they don't think about is, what science today do we know is fact that 100 years from now is going to be completely wrong? And if we can see a history of this happening, how can anybody stand on this and saying this is scientific, 100% true, and everybody else is crazy if they don't believe it? Right? That doesn't make sense to me. And I think having that mentality, in the research that we do, I think we need to have that understanding that science is a tool, and it's a good tool, and it helps us understand the world around us, but it's not the be all end all of knowledge, right? And I think looking at these types of things when in biology and paleontology and stuff really kind of helps provoke that thinking and that thought process, and I think that's a really important when we're really going to get into this subject. Another one that I knew about previously was the Laotian rock rat. It was thought to have gone extinct 11 million years ago, but they found it alive in 1996. And that's a larger mammal, not a massive mammal, but it's a large rat. Some ants thought to have gone to extinction 15 to 20 million years ago were found in Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina in 2006. So they were widespread, very widespread. I'm kind of going through this list in reverse order from oldest to kind of newest time frame, but we're still talking millions and millions of years for each of these time frames. Another mollusk we have here, a small sea snail, described in 1844 from fossil specimens in deep water coral-related sediments from southern Italy, until they were found and described in 2019 off of the coral reefs. Oh, I hate this word. Off of Mauritiana, which is the home of the dodo bird, the Martiana Islands. A mountain pygmy possum which was first discovered in the fossil record in 1895, was discovered alive in 1966. So another mammal. Another mollusk. Here's one from here in the U.S. A mollusk was originally documented in 1937 from the Pleistocene fossil specimens near Los Angeles. And then they were living, discovered in 2018 on the coast of Santa Barbara. There was a toad, which very, very few toad fossils are found. This one was described from the fossil remains in 1977 and discovered alive in 1979. Chinchilla rats, originally described based on a single species known only from archaeological remains, discovered in ancient Inca tombs. And they were described in 1912, believed to have been extinct for almost a century. And then they were discovered alive in Peru in 1999. Fruit bat was originally described from a Pleistocene garbage pile, but it was discovered alive elsewhere in Papua New Guinea. Now we have a couple of larger ones here, and I think this one's important. The false killer whale. The false killer whale was first described by the British paleontologist Richard Owen. Richard Owen is kind of the father of paleontology. He was the one that actually coined the term dinosaur. You know, he was the first one to take the bones and classify them and look at them. He was the very first one to do that. And so the false killer whale was first described based on a skull discovered in 1843 in England. And it was dated around 126,000 years ago. But then in 1861, carcasses started to wash up on shore in Denmark. And so it proved that this creature was still alive. And this is one I knew. There's a Chicoan peccary, was the last surviving species of a specific genus. And it was first described as a fossil in 1930. And then live specimens, again, found in 1974. And then there's another creature. This one I know is called a bush dog. Was first described as an extinct taxon in 1842, based on fossils uncovered from Brazilian caves. And then they found and described living specimens in 1843 without even realizing that they were the same species. Right? So they had the fossils and they described them as something, and then they found the living animal and didn't even realize it was the same thing until more testing was done on them. And so looking at this kind of stuff, this is what happens in science. This is what science really is, right? It's not a definitive thing, especially when we're talking biology like this. We have a certain understanding of how we think things work, but that's always changing and that's always updating, which is how science is supposed to be. But we need to be able to understand that it's always changing. Does that make sense?
Right.
And we don't need to die on these hills like people saying, okay, so let's transfer it into Bigfoot world, right? So a lot of people think that Gigantopithecus blacki could be a predecessor of a Bigfoot. But I wonder how many people that say that and look at the artist renditions and all this kind of stuff have actually looked into what we know about Gigantopithecus blacki. And I think a lot of people would be very disappointed because we don't know anything about it. The best that we can know about this creature is that it was probably related to current orangutans. And it was really big. That's it. That's literally all we know. We don't know if it walked upright, but that's one of the biggest things that they say. Well, we know Gigantopithecus walked upright, therefore it's probably an ancestor of a Bigfoot. We don't know that. And why don't we know that? Because the fossils that have been found of this creature are jawbones and teeth.
Partial.
Well, jawbones and right, not even a full jawbone.
Right.
right? So that doesn't tell us that this creature walked upright. It doesn't. It can give us clues to part of its facial structure, and it can give us clues potentially to its diet, and a few clues like that. But as far as how big this thing was, what color it was, did it walk upright? We don't know. And there's no scientific way to show any of those facts. So they're literally made up. It's guesswork. And yet people will die on that hill that this is what Bigfoot is. This is what Bigfoot is. And I think if we're going to be serious researchers, which is always my goal, my goal is to be a serious researcher because we don't know what these things are. We don't. And we have to have an understanding that, science isn't always what we think it is or what they tell us it is. They want us to believe that they're infallible, but history has shown us that that's just not the case. Let me look at the comments here real quick. Oh, you got to forgive me, guys, if I'm off my mark a little bit. I've been up since before 4 o'clock this morning on the road. Susan F. talking about never knew a parakeet that talked. Let me see. I don't know where that one. Oh, Crystal taught her parakeet how to say I'm not a chicken. Nice. The reason that caught my eye, and this is kind of off subject, but I'm kind of all over the place with it, is there was a website years back dedicated to a parakeet, and I believe his name was Victor. It was Victor the Talking Budgie, because other countries call them budgies or budgerigars. And it was reported that Victor couldn't just mimic human speech, but he actually spoke. Like he would converse. He had independent, intelligent thoughts. And once you were able to kind of understand his bird speech, you could actually talk to him and have conversations with him. And it was absolutely fascinating. I remember going way into this rabbit hole back in the day. And the guy would basically just record him and put the conversations on the internet and then translate as best as he could for him. And it was very interesting. And not only did that happen, but if you left your parakeet or other bird with him, he might teach your bird how to speak. So essentially, it was learning a new language for the parakeet so they could translate from bird to human speech. But totally different off topic. I just happened to see the talking thing about the parakeets. Let me see. Catherine, yes, I'll definitely get some rest tonight. Yeah, Bigfoot Report says colossal bioscientists is playing Jurassic Park there, bringing back the mammoth, the dodo, and the thylacine. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is those creatures there. What's interesting, and the reason I wanted to discuss this in the first place, next week I plan on doing a show on the thylacine, and then I want to do a show on a critter called Megalania, and then maybe we can do a mammoth one after that. But all those creatures are still reported being seen today. They're being seen today, and those would be Lazarus creatures, especially the thylacine. If you do anything in cryptozoology, you know the Tasmanian tiger. The last one known alive was in a zoo, in the Hobart Zoo, and he died. And ever since then, they're like, nope, that's it, extinct, we're done. But even back then, people were still reporting sightings of these things in the wild. Susan, Justin, most people aren't comfortable admitting they don't have the answers for everything. That is true, especially scientists that we put up on this pedestal as experts in everything, right? And I'm a big science guy. I love science, but the best explanation I ever heard was science is a tool for understanding a certain part of our world, right? but we can't use science to necessarily understand every part of our world, right? If I need to measure a piece of wood, I'm not going to grab a thermometer to measure that piece of wood, right? If I want to know what the temperature is outside, I'm not going to grab a ruler because that's not going to tell me what I'm looking for. And then science is kind of the same way. When we start looking into spiritual or supernatural things, science isn't always the right tool. And so when people say, well, ghosts can't be quantified scientifically, therefore they can't exist, that's like saying, I can't tell if it's hot outside because my ruler says it's 12 inches. It's the wrong tool for the job. And I think science is kind of like that as well. And we need to have an understanding of what science is and what science isn't. Let me see. Crystal J, could you imagine if the saber-toothed tiger was still alive? Right? I'm with you. Now, it's interesting because there have been a few reports of larcats being described as a saber-toothed tiger. There's very few of them, so it's hard to do any research on them. I can only think of one or two that I've read over the time frame. But the idea, and we've talked about this a little bit before, of Black Panthers in the United States, and on occasion, people cite what they claim to be African lions in the U.S. And Lauren Coleman puts a theory out there that they may be a relic population, a Lazarus population of the American cave lion, Panthera atrox. And so knowing that these things can be out there, it kind of helps us think that maybe some of this stuff makes a little bit of sense. A little bit of sense. Bigfoot reports and data. Hey, Harley. Megalania would be terrifying. Absolutely. Megalania is essentially a monitor lizard, like a Komodo dragon, the size of a school bus. Absolutely terrifying creature. Of all the cryptid type creatures, I think that could be out there, that is one that I wouldn't want to run across. There's just something about those ones that is wild. Could Titanoboa fall into this? Yeah, absolutely. Titanoboa would exactly be that if it's still alive. And we just recently had the show on the giant snakes. And if it was discovered we had a giant snake and it was a Titanoboa, then that would exactly fall into that category. And what's interesting with Titanoboa, or even the giant snakes, I don't think they're that mysterious. That's one of the few creatures out there, for me, is almost a no-brainer that the giant snakes are out there in places like the Amazon. I've been on a big Expedition X kick with Josh Gates, and they had a show where they were down in the Amazon and describing current day sightings of giant snakes that would fit into the Titanoboa category. It was absolutely fascinating. Let me see. Isn't there a valley in Alaska that apparently has prehistoric creatures? Yeah, there's been some vague reports, unsubstantiated though. It's one of those kind of like minor tales where, yeah, we were out hunting and exploring and we came across this valley and it had all this stuff in it. Could it be? Could be, but there's no substantiating that, unfortunately. There was actually a report of a dinosaur, kind of like either like a Tyrannosaurus Rex type of theropod or an Allosaurus or something like that up in Alaska, in the Yukon. And this was back, I want to say, in the late 1800s. And it was a explorer hunter guy out there, and they came across and said they shot it. but it escaped. They tried to track it down. They couldn't track it. Nobody believed them. They came back. And a couple decades later, one of the guys went back out there and found it again and shot it, but said it jumped into this big crevasse in the ground, like a big ravine. And again, nobody actually believed them, but they said there was twice this creature was sighted in Alaska, a big Australia, or I'm sorry, a big dinosaur. Uh, Susan, giant snakes sound awful. Yeah, for some people, I'd be okay with it. I'm not too worried about snakes, but being raised in the jungle, you just learn that they're there. Most of them don't want to hurt you on purpose. Bigfoot reports something about the burn jar. Yeah, my mind is failing me on that one. I know that's an Australian one. Um, is that the one that's supposed to be another type of the yowie, or am I just way off on that one? But I know that's an Australian one, like a bunyip and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just this idea of living fossils and things that are supposed to be extinct but are still being found. This is a huge factor in cryptozoology. You know, we got the thylacine, the dodo bird. There have been some old reports of dodo birds still being sighted on some of the islands. We can talk about megalodon, you know, reports of megalodon that people just completely blow off because they couldn't possibly still exist. You know, the coelacanth has already been found. Megalania would be one, the giant monitor lizard. They have bones, they have fossils, but they're supposed to be extinct. So many of these ones out there are part of cryptozoology, and not just the big, you know, it's not Bigfoot, it's not Loch Ness Monster. Although, if Loch Ness Monster was ever discovered to be a true, you know, plesiosaur, like the prevailing theory is for some people, that would be considered a Lazarus species. And I think it helps back up the idea, especially if you're debating with somebody, that this kind of stuff happens. Does it happen all the time, like on a daily basis? No, of course not. But science to this day is still discovering species alive that they thought were extinct, whether it be 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or millions of years ago. They're going, oh, hey, we were wrong. We were wrong. Okay, the Banjaro, he said, was it a dinosaur like a T Rex? Yeah. T Rex sightings are actually, believe it or not, and I don't want to say T Rex definitively, but a theropod type dinosaur that if we looked at, we'd be like, oh, that's a T Rex, even though it may not be because a lot of them looked very similar. Um, there's been reports, like I said, in the Yukon, there was one. There have been reports in Africa and Australia, here in the US, in the Southwest. They've had reports of smaller ones, but still out there. And the first show I did with a guest was Amanda, and she has a personal sighting of a flying pterosaur. And you know, dinosaur sightings today still happen. They still happen. Okay, so Grizzly is, or Bigfoot Reports is talking about the great white shark that had the tracker on it, and they said it got eaten. That was an interesting one because there's a few different things to look at there, right? So the trackers are usually put into a fin, a dorsal fin or a side fin, but usually a dorsal fin on these great white sharks. So a couple of mysterious things with this one. All we know is that while they were tracking it, there was some anomalies, and then they were able to find the tracker. So basically what happened was the tracker was suddenly like dropped to a super low depth in the ocean, and a lot further than the great white sharks are ever known to go. Just way, way, way deep. And then the other really mysterious thing with it is the temperature range because it reads the water temperature and everything, actually elevated a little bit while it was down there. And then eventually it came back up and they were able to track it down and locate it. What's mysterious about that is people are going, oh my gosh, something ate this great white shark, right? Well, I mean, possibly, or something just took a bite out of the fin that had the tracker on and happened to get the tracker, right? See, that's the thing that we don't know.
Well,
That's
it's
what we
not
don't
that.
know.
It's the other ones, the great whites, that's been bitten in half. They don't
Right.
know
That's
what. No, the ones,
correct.
the carcass, they don't know what is out there in the ocean that would
That can bite
attack
one
a
in half.
great white. That, yeah,
Yep.
because this is, I think they have recovered 3 so far,
Yep.
and that has
And that's
caused
a different
a
one.
ruckus.
Yep. And that's a different one. And I think maybe here's an interesting thing to get back to that. The tracker one is when they looked at the temperature readings, what they found is it would be the temperature readings they would get from inside one of those big leatherback turtles that you get in the sea, one of the giant ones that's the biggest turtle out there. It'd be the same temperature reading as if one of those ate the shark. And so that's one of the very interesting theories out there, but we don't know what that was. We just don't know. And people latched onto that and said it's proof of a megalodon, it's proof of this, it's proof of that, but it really isn't. It gives us a very interesting set of data, but we can't really extrapolate too much from there, you know. And Grizzly talking about the ones that have been found, you know, bitten in half. I haven't done a lot of individual researching into those, so I don't know what the specifics were on what they found. If they were able to definitively say this thing was bitten in half, like at one time, or was this a predation thing, or you know what I'm saying? I haven't looked into that one to know for sure, but if they're saying that it was simply bit in half, I'd have to look at what size the great white sharks were that they found. And then, but again, that definitely could be evidence of predation of a larger creature. We just have to look at it. And one thing that's interesting with the megalodon, one of the biggest criticisms I hear about these things still being around is that what they tell us from the fossil record is that these things were a warm water coastal shark, which means they weren't a deep water shark. They stayed close to shore. How they were able to tell that just from the fossils, I'm not really sure. And maybe where the fossils were found. But to me, that could be like, well, maybe they're like some whales. When they go to die, they beach themselves. And so when these guys go to die, they come close. I'm not really sure how they pinpoint that idea. But to sit here and say, well, you know, with evolution, you know, whales were able to come up on land and walk and then go back into the water and become different creatures 3 or 4 times. But then to say, well, the megalodon shark, there's no way it would have swam to deeper water and adjusted to that. Right? I think that's kind of a ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous kind of thought process. There's certain things you just can't tell from fossils, guys. You just can't. You know, you can't look at a fossil of a bull shark and know that they're going to be, you know, able to survive for long periods of terms in fresh water. You couldn't tell that from the fossils, right? And they've been found, you know, up the Mississippi River, up in Lake Pontchartrain. They've been found all over the place. Let me see. Blue Rider, welcome to the show. Who else we got? Any other questions or anything, guys, about this idea? Like I said, I know it's not a whole lot of in-depth to dive into on it, but I think it's good to have a knowledge and an understanding of what a living fossil is, what a zombie creature. So a zombie, I know I didn't cover a whole lot. A zombie animal is one that they discovered really low in the fossil record, like a long time ago, and then rediscovered it in an area younger where it shouldn't be, but they're not considered living today. So it's kind of like having two periods of extinction where they're going, this went extinct twice with no intervening growing, you know? Um, and so it's basically a Lazarus animal that went extinct twice, supposedly. And again, if we're looking at it went extinct twice, why are we so certain it's extinct now? How come it's just not still around? I find it interesting how people just put all this stock and faith in what science says, when even in our lifetime we've seen science about different things change and evolve. Look at dinosaurs, right? When I was a kid, I was fascinated with dinosaurs. That's what I wanted to do, is be a paleontologist and study fossils and dinosaurs. And back then, it was a certain thought process on them. You know, Tyrannosaurus was a predator. Um, Brachiosaurus probably lived in swamps. Brontosaurus isn't even a real dinosaur. Apatosaurus lived in swamps to support its bulk, and they were certain of all these things. You know, they were cold-blooded. They were more amphibian or reptilian than anything else. They are so positive of all these things. And now, just, 30 years later, there's a completely different scientific view of what dinosaurs supposedly were. Susan, where have people seen flying dinosaurs? Amanda, my friend, she was actually on one of Grizzly's shows yesterday at 7. She had her sighting in North Georgia, in the mountains up here, when she was a kid. Oh, now I lost my train of thought. Thank you. The thing with dinosaurs, right? So nowadays they've changed so many dinosaurs to be feathered, or they've changed, now they're saying Tyrannosaurus was probably more of a scavenger, like a vulture, than it was a hunter, and all these different things. So what was solid scientific fact 30 years ago is now considered completely wrong. And if you bring it up, you'll get laughed at for it, because that's not science. That's not true. You don't know what you're talking about. And we just have to keep that in mind as we're going into these rabbit holes, as we're understanding things. And it's funny, because I'll get into these debates with people and they'll say, well, you don't understand what science is. Science is always changing and they're able to adapt and all this. And I'm saying, no, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
But you have to understand it's a continuum, because what we thought 30 years ago isn't what we think now. So what we think now isn't going to be what we think 30 years from now. It's going to completely change again. And yet people will die on that hill that science says this, so this is the 100% truth. And when people start thinking like that and they start talking like that, they're not really thinking about things, and they don't really have an understanding. They're parroting and they're repeating back the things that they've heard. And just remember that as we get out there and you're researching and you're talking to people and you're on Facebook and doing all this stuff, we just don't know. And that works on both sides. Science can't say for sure. Anybody that claims 100%, science has proven this, that's a very rare thing, especially when it comes to animals. Science very rarely proves anything.
I appreciate it, Justin. You did a
Yeah.
good job. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions or anything? Susan, yikes, I'm in Georgia. Yeah, there's actually a couple different dinosaur sightings in Georgia, up in the mountains.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up. And from coast to
Yeah.
coast around the world, everybody, good night. Take care.
Thank y'all. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Coming to a YouTube channel near you.